welcome to mini episode 375 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And I have one spooky story for you today, and this story comes from July the 2nd, 2024. And today's story comes from Alyssa. First, I want to say thank you for reading my first submission, the episode titled Lalaurie Mansion. There is such a feeling of giddiness and excitement when you hear your story told. I'm going to forewarn that this is potentially going to be quite long. I have many more experiences I want to share, including the most recent occurrences that have not been pleasant. We will start with the lighter end of the spectrum. People tell stories all the time about their loved ones visiting them once they've passed. I've been fortunate enough to have some visitations. Some of them are probably just dreams. I am a very lucid, very vivid dreamer. I remember the vast majority of my dreams, even those that I had as a young child. I have confused dreams for reality in the past and vice versa. I've talked about a vacation that we've never had, but I swear it happened. And some of them become deja vu incidents and hit me like a brick wall. Now and again I have deja vu about having a deja vu moment. Talk about a mindfuck. Anyway, I digress. My maternal grandparents were my best friends. I was a papa's girl through and through. I loved him, and as the first grandchild, we had a very special bond. He loved all of us, and each of us had a unique relationship with him. He was the gentlest, kindest person I have ever known. He was generous, he was fun, he was everything and more. I always had so much fun with him, and we did everything together. My grandpa passed away in April 2003 from lung cancer when I was only 7 years old. Fast forward 13 years. Through a very long chain of events, bad relationships with previous boyfriends, falling out with parents and friends, so on and so forth, I ended up with my maternal grandmother. We called her Grandma Nan, which was short for Nancy. I lived with her and her husband Paul. They were amazing and helped me through so many of my struggles. I got to see family that I hadn't seen in years when they came to visit my grandparents. There was an evening when my grandmother, my great aunt, and I were sitting on the couch watching The Voice. For whatever reason that I cannot remember, we were talking about my late grandfather. I don't remember the conversation now, but I do remember going to bed that night and crying before falling asleep. I cried because I couldn't remember his voice. My papa had been gone for so long. I remember everything about him, even the smell of what I assume was his cologne. You know how every person has their own scent? How a house always smells a particular way? Funny enough, what you call an old people smell, as an example. He didn't smell like that stereotypical smell, but you get the gist. But I could not remember his voice. That night, I had a dream. In my dream, my papa was sitting in his recliner. His favourite soft burgundy lazy boy. It was the last place I had seen him in the night before he passed. I remember being a little freaked out, saying goodbye, and that I loved him while he sat there zoned out and not even seeming to notice that I was there. But in my dream, he was awake. I was so excited to see him. I was confused to a degree because he was there. And I was the same age I was at the time. It was as though it was happening in real life, in the present time. I remember asking him how he was here and hugging him, but he stopped and said very seriously, "I'm not. I'm still gone, but you wanted to hear my voice." And I heard it, so clearly. He was so real I could touch him. He smiled at me. And then it was over. I'm absolutely positive that it was him visiting me, to give me comfort and let me hear him talking to me again. And I can't recall a dream with him in it since then. I'm sure I've had them, but they were just regular dreams. Fast forward again about 6 months. I was up on my own 2 feet again, and I left my grandmother's house. I was trying to patch things up with my boyfriend at the time. Big mistake. But I quickly realised my mistake this time and got out and into my own apartment. Just after I moved out, Paul and Grandma Nan came into town to visit my boyfriend and me to give me the news that she had lung cancer. Those 6 months I lived with her were a blessing in disguise, giving me that time with her. She was only given 3 to 6 months, but lived another 1.5 years. It took me 5 years before I could visit her grave after the funeral, despite only living 20 minutes away. I just couldn't do it. But things changed one day. I was having a complete meltdown, and all I wanted was my grandmother. My now boyfriend, I know, many relationships to keep track of. In reality, it's only been 4 people. Not that that's pertinent information. He was trying to console me, and I told him that I really just wanted to see her. So he drove me to the cemetery. I took my son with me and I sat at her grave. I talked to her, introduced her to my son, and I said my goodbyes. And that night she came to see me. She laughed with me. I told her I missed her. She knew, but she told me she was always with me. She looked so healthy and happy, and I loved to see that. She's been in a couple of dreams since, and in one of them we actively went shopping at a flea market. I know it sounds goofy, and could have just been a lucid dream, but really it just felt like a fun shopping trip. So those are the more enjoyable stories. It probably seems a bit random because none of these stories are necessarily tied together. It's pretty much just a menagerie of encounters. But let's continue. In 2018, I got married to my high school best friend, Tony. We had wed on my grandma's birthday, a permission I had asked my grandma before she passed because I knew she wouldn't make it to then. She excitedly agreed. Tony had a friend, Justin, who he had recently begun to hang out with again. I was sitting in my living room watching some paranormal YouTuber when Justin piped up about how he wanted to go ghost hunting. I loved the idea, naturally, being interested in the paranormal. Tony prodded for me to tell Justin of my experiences, and I did. We decided pretty quickly that we wanted to go out and visit a couple of the places known for people to experience spooky things. Places called Acid Bridge and the 7 Gates of Hell, both located in Collinsville, Illinois. We opted for Acid Bridge first. There are a couple of legends that surround Acid Bridge. The most well-known is about a group of teenagers who decided to party on the bridge, all of whom were on acid. One of the teens brought out a gun and started shooting randomly, and a bullet ricocheted and hit one of the teens in the head. The group dumped the body in the creek, and the teenager actually ended up drowning. Another is said that a little 8-year-old girl died in a car crash on the bridge. She can be seen sitting on the edge of it, just staring into the woods. Supposedly, if you put baby powder or something similar on the back of your car and walk away, you will come back to handprints. And the third is about a phantom car that will chase you off the bridge if you are caught idling. I personally don't have experience with any of these, though I do have a friend who claims the phantom car. However, we did visit the bridge. Justin's girlfriend, also named Alyssa, joined us on the adventure. Justin had an EVP app on his phone that I completely disregarded. I thought it was a stupid idea to test that on a phone, and nothing came of it. We visited the bridge around 10 o'clock in the evening. It should be said that this bridge is littered with graffiti and trash. However, it is actually a bridge that is completely in use and regularly driven on. There are bullet holes in the guardrail, which some suggest is proof of the gunshots from the partying teenagers. It could also be someone who put them there to try and validate the legend. Alyssa had stayed back, leaning on the car. Tony, Justin and I were in the middle of the bridge. It was kind of chilly and a little unnerving to be there, but it's really just a spooky place to be. I feel the story of the teenagers is probably true, but there is no story that any paranormal experience comes from that legend. The 3 of us made our way back, and Alyssa looked visibly upset. She was a skeptic as is. When Justin asked what was wrong, she simply looked at us and said, "I didn't want to go over there, because there were 4 of you on that bridge." She swore that she saw 3 black silhouettes, one of each of us. It was too dark to really make out features when we were that far from the car. But then she saw a 4th one. Kind of freaky. We got out of there and headed for our next destination, the 7 Gates of Hell. These gates are a set of railroad trestles built in the 1800s to expand the mining town. Supposedly, during that time, there was heavy Ku Klux Klan activity, hangings, satanic rituals, and other such paranormal activity. None of them are used by trains today. There is a story that encompasses the 7 gates, but a couple of the gates have their own stories. In general, the story is that if you pass through each gate in succession and pass through the last one at midnight, you will open the gates of hell, and hellhounds will jump out and drag you to hell. Drive them in reverse, and you open a rift that looks into hell, or just that if you drive through them at any time, you open the gates of hell. We chose to check out each of the gates, getting out and walking under them and around them. Not every gate is accessible anymore by car. At the first gate, we parked and climbed up the embankment and onto the tracks. I stood, staring down the track. As far down in the distance as you could possibly go, there was a bright light. It looked like the headlight of a train, and you could almost feel a slight rumble below your feet. I told Tony, and Justin nodded, saying that was a commonly noted thing by people. A little weird, but I just shrugged it off. Meanwhile, Tony grabbed a railroad spike and brought it down with us. We got back into the car and drove to the second gate, getting out once again. Surrounding this gate is the story of a young African-American boy who was on the run from the KKK. When he was caught, he was hanged from the gate. It's said that if you drive through at midnight, you can see the body of a swinging boy. Mind you, I didn't know any of these tales before travelling through here. It wasn't until after I went home that I looked into it. If you live in the area, everyone knows about the 7 Gates of Hell and the urban legend of opening a portal, but the individual stories of the trestles aren't as commonly circulated. Alyssa and Justin decided to go through the gate to the other side. Tony and I casually walked through, following them. Midway through, we stopped. I looked at Tony quizzically and put my hand out to stop him. When walking through, our footsteps echoed. For shits and giggles, Tony is 6'1" and weighed about 260 pounds at the time. Point being, his steps were loud. When he stopped, a set of footsteps kept going for a couple more steps and then stopped. Instantly, I was sick to my stomach. I turned around, as did Tony, and we took off back to the car. First, a brisk walk. The last thing I wanted to do was to run from whatever was there and provoke it. But as we walked faster, so did the steps behind us. I finally said fuck it and ran full sprint back to the car. Just outside the gate, scrambling and out of breath to get to the car, the steps stopped. And then there was nothing but silence. I didn't need any more of the bridges. As intrigued as I am with the paranormal, I didn't care to scare myself any further for the evening. Alyssa and Justin joined us, and we told them about what had just happened. They had not witnessed anything, but Alyssa was getting extremely sick to her stomach. So we got back into the car, drove through the remaining gates, and went home. In the couple of months after our visit, I would consistently feel like I was being watched. I didn't mind being home alone, as Tony was always working. I had my 2 cats and was content. I didn't work because I have epilepsy, and at the time, Tony was making enough money to support us, and it was just safer that way. I didn't put much credence into it and honestly brushed it off, until the second to last day in our house. A quick series of events spiraled downward and Tony was losing his job. We quickly had to pack up and get out of the house and opted to move in with my father, who had a spare bedroom at the time. Justin and Alyssa were there to help us pack. Everyone else was outside while I was inside and throwing everything I could into boxes. I was kneeling on the floor and I looked up to see Justin. I asked him what was up and he jumped, shocked to see me. I was confused. He looked at me and said, "If you're in there, then who's in the office?" I shook my head, more perplexed. I swear, Ali, I saw someone in there. I thought it was you. It was just like a brief person in my peripherals. Tony walked into the house and Justin began to tell him about what had happened. I walked out of the bedroom and Justin instantly took a step back. Whoa. It just got so heavy in here. Hold on, he said, and stepped out of the room for a moment and then stepped back in. It's you, he said to me. I told him that I felt like things had been going on around the house and feeling like I was being watched, and the heaviness in the atmosphere. And then I remembered the damn railroad spike. I thought he had put it back before we had left the gates initially, but when we got home he had it with him. I told him that it had been a very stupid idea to take something like that from a haunted location, whether it was truly haunted or not. Energy attaches to things like that. He picked up the spike, went to the edge of the yard and threw it out as far as he could into the patch of trees across the street. And oddly enough, just like that, the weight was gone. I couldn't understand at the time why it had attached to me, but looking back later on, I was always open to the paranormal. Tony was a skeptic, aside from his one instance of a ghost that we had experienced together a year after we had first met. It was the only experience he swore to. So essentially it left me open to an attachment or some form of communication. I have never experienced anything related to that evening again. Not quite so bad, right? It could have been worse. I've had my occurrences here and there after that. And then the bigger ones that I mentioned in my previous submission about the little girl spirit in my apartment in the last 2 years. I sent in my last story in February. My situation has changed drastically since then. I moved away from Illinois and now Michael, his daughter, my son, and I all live in Panama City Beach, Florida with my father now. We are staying with him while we save up a little more money to get our own place. Florida living is not cheap. But I'm a daddy's girl. I missed my father and truth be told I have a beach down here and it is my utter happy place. I could just sit there for hours and be at peace. Or sit in the warm Gulf water and let it all wash away. With the weather, there hasn't been much of that lately. Anyway, I'm rambling. We visited my dad on several occasions. He rents a 4-bedroom house and had the room for us. From the look of the inside and even the outside, you'd never know that it was built in 1950. I'd never really felt off in this house except at night, and only in one specific area of the house. A long hallway that leads to a bathroom, the kids' room and my bedroom. The house didn't give off a bad vibe necessarily, but every night when I'm walking down the hallway, I almost rush through it because I feel so uncomfortable, like someone is watching me and going to chase me to my room. There is only a light switch at the beginning of the hallway, so I can't just turn the light on and get to the end of the hallway by my bedroom and turn the light off. I just have to book it. Nobody else seems to feel it or notice it. But again, nobody else seems to ever experience it. Fortunately, my son never noticed the eeriness. Given his experiences in my apartment, I was slightly worried that this would affect him too. We've been living here since the beginning of April. That feeling of being watched continued immediately. Honestly, I just didn't want to be confronted by whatever it was that was there. For a month, that was all it was, just that eerie sensation. I tried hard to ignore it. But after that initial month, that feeling began to get stronger. I would get into bed and I would say aloud the same thing I said in my apartment. God protects this house. He protects my family, my friends and myself. Nothing may touch us here. Now and again I'd whisper the Lord's Prayer, what I could remember of it, and I would settle into bed with my back against Michael's facing out. I felt that I would be more comfortable opening my eyes to something than to have something at my back and snatch me. Probably paranoia, but at least I had a thought process that helped. Each night I repeated this routine. If I could avoid going out of the room, I would. Unfortunately, my son does not want to sleep, ever, or stay asleep in his own bed when he is put there. I'm always up in the middle of the night for a glass of water or helping him to the bathroom. And of course, I'm too worried to sleep or my son just simply won't let me. You know, the typical 4-year-old that has to tell you about everything, asks you constant questions and demands that you watch what they're doing at every moment. I told my mom about how I felt, and she told me that she always felt a weird vibe in Dad's house, that she didn't really like it. I told her that it was really only the hallway. Things escalated. I got to my bedroom one night after shimmying quickly as per usual and slipped into bed. Everyone else was already asleep and I was turning on Supernatural. I always watch an episode or two at bedtime because it's hard for me to fall asleep. And in the doorway was a figure. I don't want to say it was a shadow because it didn't sort of fade away. You think of a shadow and you think just a 2D shape on the ground or something kind of smoky with no real form, but this was a solid black figure. It was human in shape, but there were no features, just black, like a shadow had gained a form and stood there. It wasn't very tall. It stood about halfway up the door frame. It didn't move. It didn't try to come in. It didn't make any sound. Its presence was not that of a human entity, in the sense that it seemed like a traditional ghost that is male or female, or you sense the presence of a male or a female. It was just that. And it. I froze, unsure of what to do. And then I began to whisper again that God was in this house. I blinked and it was gone. At least from the doorway. This happened a few more times, and each time I just told it to go away, that it wasn't welcome. And it would disappear from the immediate vicinity, but I could still feel its presence. It did not want to leave. I wouldn't say that it was trying to hurt me, but it was not friendly. And it didn't simply just want me to leave. It still felt so sinister. A few weeks ago I was in bed. On one of the rare occasions that I was actually asleep, I felt this sudden pressure against my face. Like someone else was pushing their face against mine as hard as they could. You know when you close your eyes to rub them, the pressure that you feel and the colour change you experience while your eyes are still closed. That was happening from the force of this face so hard against mine. But it didn't feel like a normal face. It didn't have the obvious impression of a nose or a mouth. Eyes it did have though, because I could practically see them against my own even with my eyes closed. And when the pressure went away, and I could open my eyes, the figure was disappearing from my door. I felt so sick to my stomach, and stayed awake as long as I could until I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. I told Michael about it the other day, and he just kind of stared at me. I told him I knew he didn't believe me, and he responded with, "No. We aren't experiencing it because we aren't thinking about it," which was fair. I was leaving myself open, and I felt like I couldn't close it off. For about a week it seemed like things were quiet. I didn't really even seem to have much of a feeling of being watched. I was just so busy with work that maybe I was distracted enough not to have it in the forefront of my mind. Wishful thinking though, because a few weeks ago things came to a head. I'd gone to bed, finished my episode of Supernatural, and put on a random show on YouTube. I can't sleep without background noise or some sort of light. I've always been that way. My son had joined me in bed on my left side and Micah was on my right. Both of them are very deep sleepers. In my apartment, I always had an alarm clock visible and could see what time it was. But I don't in my room here. Considering it was after 1:30 a.m. when I switched to YouTube and I probably had about an hour of sleep, I imagine that it was nearly 3 a.m. at this point. I've experienced sleep paralysis many times before. It's a horrifying experience. And each time I've had an episode, it's been a different experience, and all of them bad. I want to chalk this off as sleep paralysis, but I don't feel that this was the case. An immense amount of pressure weighed down on me. I'd fallen asleep on my left side with my body angled towards Michael. My body was practically pinned down and I felt as though something was trying to smother my face. I wanted to trash around, and in my mind I was screaming to move. I couldn't open my eyes. I kept trying to pry my head up and finally I was able to move it just enough to lift my head mere inches from the pillow. I moved my right arm to grab for Michael, trying to wake him while still feeling like I could hardly move. I croaked out, "Leave," so weakly, and then, "Leave," again, trying to gain my voice. Meanwhile, my hand was still on Michael's arm. He was sleeping with his back to me, but I couldn't wake him up. As I gained more of my voice after repeating "leave" a few more times, I finally shouted, "Leave!" And in my peripherals I could see the figure rushing out of the room. My heart was racing, and I slowly sat up, incredulous to what had just happened. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to sleep. I couldn't get Michael to wake up while everything was happening, and I didn't want to wake him up now. The thing was gone, and if I could avoid a big commotion that would cause my son to wake up, I would. I just wanted to sleep and forget that anything had happened. Honestly, I don't remember falling back to sleep, but I must have at some point, because the next morning I asked Michael if he heard me shouting last night, which he didn't, and it didn't surprise me. I had really only gotten one good shout out, but since I have not had an issue. I've told both of my parents. My dad doesn't open up himself to any of it. He's not necessarily a skeptic, but if he doesn't acknowledge that it exists, he doesn't have to deal with it. He told me that he was glad that it was gone. Every now and again I scurry down the hallway, a residual feeling, and I just tell the hallway a nice fuck you and be on my way to the bedroom. I've been waiting a couple of weeks to write in about this, giving the air time to settle and things to get back to normal. But there it is. Alyssa, thank you so much for taking the time to report back to us with more of your wonderful stories. I mean, first of all, right, let's go right back to the beginning, and we are going to talk briefly about your visitation dreams. And I say briefly not because I think they're not worth talking about, but because we talk about visitation dreams so much in the podcast that I feel like I'm almost repeating myself when we talk about them. I think the fear and the worry and the reality of forgetting what somebody sounds like after they die is a huge thing for people. That feeling of I'm never going to hear their voice again, and their voice is so quintessentially theirs. It's part of what makes them them, and you realize I'm never going to hear their voice again, and shit, I can't remember what they sound like. And that's a really scary part of grief. So it's really beautiful that you had that dream where your grandfather spoke to you and was able to say, "Hey, I'm here because I know that you're worried. You're worried that you're not going to hear my voice again. Well, here I am. Here's my voice." And it's true that those visitation dreams, they have a certain weird quality about them where they just feel different. It's such a strange thing, and there's no kind of quantifiable way to explain it other than it just feels different. And like I always say, if it makes you feel good, if it brings you closure, if it makes you feel at peace, if it makes you feel closer to that person that passed away, then that's what's important, not whether or not it was a dream that was, quote unquote, just a dream or a visitation. And moving on to Acid Bridge and the Seven Gates of Hell. I mean, those are some pretty kick-ass names for places, right? And I've always found with these urban legends about places, so you've got Acid Bridge where they think that a load of teenagers were taking acid, one of them brought a gun, was shooting randomly, the bullet ricocheted and hit one of the teens in the head, the others panicked, dumped the body in the creek, and the teenager ended up drowning. Often I find that those stories, while they might not be like 100% true, as in everything that is told is factual, there's often kernels of truth in these stories, whether or not there was something similar that happened on that bridge, or whether that particular story happened on a bridge elsewhere. And you'll often hear the same urban legends in different towns, that they get passed from town to town, and then a particular bridge in the town will be prescribed that particular urban legend. Because that is not the only place that I have also heard of that has the story of if you put baby powder on your car, there will be handprints on your car afterwards. That's definitely not the only place that I've heard that story from. And what's really interesting is that while you guys didn't see or hear or feel anything while you were on the bridge, you were just like, oh, this is a bit weird, that Alyssa did see something, a silhouette, a shadow of a fourth person that was standing with you. And look, is it possible that even if there was no story associated with this bridge, as in all of the stories are just simply urban legends, there is no basis of truth, but what you have over the years is hundreds and hundreds of people who visit the bridge expecting to see something paranormal, almost willing something paranormal to happen? Do you end up with like a tulpa type situation where you will something into existence? And I have to say, Alyssa, I agree with you. You know, if I go to somewhere that's called the Seven Gates of Hell and there's got all these legends about opening portals to hell, which fundamentally I don't believe, right? But if it's got stories and links to the KKK, to real life events, even without that, like, you best be sure I'm not taking a fucking railroad spike from that particular place and bringing it home. And you could easily say, you know, that your feelings of being watched, the footsteps, hearing the footsteps, etc., Alyssa, the other Alyssa, feeling really sick, you could easily be like, oh, you know, that's just because of where you were and your knowledge about the place, etc., etc. I am telling you now, okay? I don't care if it's an urban legend. I don't care how skeptical I am. If I hear footsteps when I'm on a spooky abandoned bridge somewhere, I'm running. If I'm feeling sick, I'm running. And puking probably at the same time, and I'm not taking anything from the railroad. And it must have been terrifying to realise, oh, this isn't my imagination. So, you know, Justin has just seen somebody in the office and he's had that horrible dawning realisation that it wasn't in fact the person that he thought it was, and that there should have been nobody in the office. Like, that is terrifying. But I do love that Tony just flung the railroad spike into the woods, just run and like a discus flung that thing into the woods and be like, well, rubs his hands, that's that, done. I'd love it if in Tony's head he's like, I'm pretty sure that demons or ghosts or entities or whatever, it works the same as dogs, right? You throw something, they're going to go chase it. Fine, that works. And moving on to your next part of your story, living in your dad's house. I know this is completely irrelevant and I'm not trying to make fun of your story, but before I recorded this, I was watching the Olympic speed walking event, and I'm just imagining you Olympic speed walking down the corridor, which is not funny. I'm sorry, your feeling of being watched and feeling uncomfortable is not funny, but Olympic speed walking in paranormal situations, that's funny. And I do wonder if it's like you said, that because you're open to the paranormal, because you have an interest in it, and that makes you somehow more perceptible to what is happening around you, that's why you're the one seeing the shadow figures and not the other people in the house. Or I know you said specifically it wasn't really shadowy, it was just a human-esque form, human in shape, but some sort of non-human entity. It sounds absolutely petrifying to have those feelings of being watched and feelings of discomfort, to have them personified and embodied in this shadowy entity, figure, whatever it was. But it does sound like, right, this is me trying to find a silver lining in this situation. It does sound like you have some sort of power over this, you know, that you shouted leave and in your peripheral vision you saw the figure rushing out of the room, etc., etc. And I know that there are people out there who have abilities, who are sensitive to the paranormal, who are able to see things or hear things or feel things. I also know those people have ways and means in which to close themselves off and protect themselves from seeing and feeling and experiencing these things. And I wonder if it would be worthwhile looking up ways to protect yourself or close yourself off from the paranormal. Because you never know, right? There might be something out there that you go, right, well, this seems like an easy and straightforward thing to do that aligns with my feelings and beliefs about the paranormal. And it might be a way to protect yourself and stop these things from happening at nighttime. Just putting it out there. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Alyssa for sending in your story. Remember, if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.